Hey guys, tonight we're walking through the damp alleyways of a medieval town, your woolen robe dragging slightly in the mud as chickens scatter at your feet. The stench of smoke, sweat, and yesterday's stew fills your nose. Your sandals, if you're lucky enough to have any, are soaked. Somewhere behind you, a bell tolls for a church service you're probably late for. But that's fine, because you're standing there in your one good robe. And tonight, you'll learn how that robe, that seemingly simple garment, is more devious than it looks. Let's be real, you're not surviving long in the 14th century. Not unless you've got strong lungs, a healthy distrust of rats, and a tailor with very steady hands. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is right now in the comments. I always love seeing who's tuning in and when. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge forward, robe damp from the morning mist. It's heavy, this robe, woven thick from homespun wool and dyed a modest shade of brown, unless you're royalty or just trying to be robbed. The hem tickles your ankles as you try not to step in anything too fresh. The streets are, generously, a soup of filth. And your robe? It's worth about half a cow. Maybe more if it doesn't smell like pickled herring. Tailors, in this world, are like magicians with fewer morals. They take shapeless bolts of cloth and sculpt illusions of class, profession, and decency. But for you, the robe is simple, warm enough, dry enough, and, if you're lucky, loose enough to hide a small wedge of cheese from your brother. Historians still argue whether medieval clothing was really as stiff and formal as it looks in paintings. Many suspect those portraits were the Instagram filters of their time, idealized, smoothed, flattering. In reality, your tunic wrinkles like a raisin after 2 hours in the rain. Your robe's sleeves are a disaster waiting to happen. Cut wide, lined with lint, and heavy when wet. But they serve a purpose. You can slip things into them, a knife, maybe a crust of bread, or if you're being scandalous, a love note. Because yes, sleeves were the original cargo pockets. Just don't wave too enthusiastically or your secret contents might go flying into the gutter. The thread holding your sleeves together? It's probably made from flax, wool, or, if you're fancy, silk stolen from a church banner. Every stitch is done by hand. That takes time. Tailors often work until their fingers are numb and their eyesight is permanently squinty. But they can't stop, because your entire reputation might hang on a nicely draped sleeve. And what about the mud you're wading through? Well, mud isn't just a nuisance, it's a message. A filthy hem tells people where you've been. Upper crust types actually held their garments up with ribbon loops or little handmaids to avoid the muck. You just pray it dries before dinner. There's something oddly intimate about this robe you wear. It's not just fabric, it's a map of your life. Patches on the knees from slipping in snow. A frayed collar from nervous fidgeting in front of the bishop. And of course, that slightly uneven hem where your cousin tried to help and so did drunk. The quirky bit? Some tailors stitch charms into the seams. Tiny metal tokens or knots of hair meant to ward off lice, evil spirits, or your mother-in-law. Imagine that, your robe isn't just covering your body, it's carrying little secret prayers with every step. Of course, back then, fashion wasn't about comfort. It was a full-on weaponized social signal. You dress wrong, and people assume you're a thief, a fool, or worse, a poet. The moment you turn that corner into the market square, eyes are scanning your cut, your fabric, your color. That patch on your elbow? It's telling everyone you're either clumsy or cheap. Or both. There are even church edicts that dictate what you can and can't wear, depending on your station in life. The wrong length of robe can get you excommunicated or laughed out of court. No pressure. And let's not forget, your robe isn't warm enough. It never is. Not with wind slipping through the seams and dampness clinging to your ankles like a spiteful ghost. You wrap your arms around yourself, hunch your shoulders, and dream of fur-lined cloaks like the nobles have. Real fur. Not squirrel. Not rabbit. Wolf, maybe. Or something mythical and expensive. Your breath steams out as you trudge onward. That bell's still ringing. Maybe it's for a wedding. Maybe a funeral. Either way, you're probably expected to show up in that same robe. Because owning two would mean you're rich. And rich people don't do their own laundry. Somewhere behind you, a tailor curses as a bolt of linen unravels in the wind. You smile. Tailoring is a dangerous sport. You duck into the covered walkway behind the apothecary, mostly to avoid the splatter of something being dumped from a second-floor window, and find yourself face to face with your town's most important man you've never really thanked, the tailor. He doesn't look impressive. Narrow shoulders. Wrinkled hands that twitch like they've been sewing in dreams. But don't let that fool you. He's probably stitched more power into this town than the mayor. His workshop is small, warm, and filled with the smell of beeswax, stale wool, and just a hint of singed thread. You step inside, and suddenly, it's a different world. By the flickering light of a smoky oil lamp, he sharpens his shears, great iron things heavy enough to double as blunt weapons. The blade edge glints, those slightly dulled from cutting through weeks of itchy wool, slippery linen, and the occasional finger. You wouldn't guess it, but those shears haven't been properly cleaned in months. Maybe years. Tailors don't have time for hygiene. They've got 6 doublets due by St. Rumbold's Day. Rats scurry in the thatch above you. The tailor doesn't flinch. He lost a spool of gold thread to them last week, and frankly, he's still mad about it. You can tell because he mutters something in Latin and spits into the hearth. Some say it's a curse. Some say it's just bad grammar. Historians still argue whether tailors really believed in household spirits or if that was just how they explained missing thimbles. He lays out a bolt of cloth dyed a deep blue, not quite royal, but enough to get you stopped at city gates for aspiring above your rank. He drapes it over a headless dress form and begins sketching with chalk. His hand moves like it's remembering something your body hasn't even done yet. The robe he's about to make won't just cover you, it'll create you. A rich merchant? A pious monk? A traveling bard with too many secrets and not enough pockets? Speaking of pockets, there are none. Not yet. Technically, they don't exist as you know them. You think of sliding your hands into your hoodie today. Comfort, storage, awkward small talk avoidance. But here, a pocket is a betrayal. Too suggestive. Too intimate. Too close to hiding something from the wrong person. Instead, there will be slits. Discreet ones. Usually at the sides, so you can reach through the outer robe and into the pouch tied to your belt underneath. That's where the real action is. Your knife. Your coins. Your dried apple slice you've been saving since Michaelmas. As the tailor works, he hums tunelessly, eyes narrowed. You notice the leather strap around his wrist. It's not jewelry. It's a pin cushion, dotted with needles like a sea urchin's nightmare. He doesn't even look as he stabs one in for later. His fingers are so callous, he could probably snuff a candle with his thumb and not feel a thing. On a shelf above him sits a tin of beeswax for thread coating, next to a carved bone needle case that's been passed down through 4 generations. Inside are 2 needles that once stitched a duke's funeral cloak. Allegedly. You'll never prove it, and neither will he. But the story adds flair, and flair adds coin. He pauses to take a gulp from a cracked clay mug. It smells faintly of nettle tea and desperation. You offer to help, and he snorts. You want to thread wool into linen during a fog? Good luck, lad. Then he hands you a bundle of cloth and tells you to hold it like you're hugging a cat who hates you but knows your secrets. You oblige. And while you stand there, awkwardly clutching wool and wondering how one becomes a tailor in the first place, he tells you a secret. I once sewed a pocket, he says, barely above a whisper. A real one. For a baroness. Right into the side of her gown. She kept a tiny dagger in it. You ask what happened. She used it, he says simply, then chuckles. Don't ask on who. You don't. You watch as he finishes the robe's lining with invisible stitches, so clean you'd think elves helped. Which they might have. Historians still argue whether tailor folklore about helpful night spirits was metaphor, madness, or Union propaganda. There's something reverent about it. The layering of fabric. The soft brushing of seams. The murmured curse when a stitch goes crooked. You wonder if tailors were more like monks with needles than craftsmen. Or maybe monks were just tailors with less fashion sense. The clock tower chimes. Not that the tailor looks up. His whole world is this room. His calendar is the next feast day. His deadline is whoever's banging on his door shouting about buttons. And as the candle burns low, you glance again at those gleaming shears, resting now like sleeping dragons. They'll be back at it tomorrow, slicing through fabric and illusion alike. But for tonight, you help him fold a newly finished robe, plain, dignified, and with 2 very subtle slits near the hips. The tailor winks. You smile. You won't look at robes the same way again. Morning fog clings to your ankles as you slip the robe on. The wool is stiff at first, creased from where it was folded tight under the tailor's bench. You wiggle your arms through the sleeves, long and voluminous like you're trying to sneak a duck past city guards. And then you reach for the side, there, right where you said, and your fingers slip into a slit so smooth, it's like the fabric is sighing in secret. You're not really touching a pocket. Not in the modern sense. There's no stitched pouch sewn into the inside of the robe. Instead, your fingers slide through the carefully placed opening and fumble their way into the small leather sack tied to the belt beneath your outer garment. It's warm from your skin. You find a coin, a flint shard, and, a dried fig you thought you'd eaten. This is medieval innovation at its peak, access without exposure. A world without zippers, snaps, or Velcro, where storage has to be strategic, subtle, and socially acceptable. You don't just shove things into clothes in this century. That's how you get fined. Or worse, suspected. Historians still argue whether these robe slits were universally practical or if they carried coded social messages, inviting hands only when you belong to a certain class, gender, or guild. You're starting to suspect it's both. Everything in this world seems designed to say more than it does. You wander through the muddy square, the slits swaying closed behind you like curtains. No one can tell what you've got under there. And that's the point. A man selling onions shouts something about thievery. Another chases a goose. And still, you walk on, secure in the knowledge that your secrets, your tiny pouch of copper coins, your hidden scrap of parchment with a name scrawled on it, are out of sight. Tailoring here is not just function. It's a game of misdirection. Sleight of hand, but with cloth. The cleverest tailors hide the seams themselves, using what they call blind stitching, a method passed through whispered apprenticeships and demonstrated only when no one else is in the room. You once heard that a robe made by the master tailor of Bruges had 22 secret compartments, hidden not just by flaps and folds, but by the illusions of shadow and cut. It said a spy carried stolen church scrolls under his armpits, stitched into the lining, right under a bishop's nose. No one noticed. The robe was too elegant. But elegance is expensive. And expense is dangerous. That's why you keep things small. Subtle. Your pouch carries only what's needed. A flint. A coin. A folded piece of cloth with a drop of scent, lavender, maybe. Or rosemary. To sniff when the fish stalls get too vivid. You reach the baker's stall and buy half a loaf with one of your coins. As you pull it from your hidden pouch, you do it slowly, carefully. Not because you're being sneaky, but because here, the act of reaching into your robe slit has a certain gravity. People notice. They pretend not to, but they notice. What you take out, and how fast you do it, says everything. Too quick, and you're a cut purse. Too slow, and you're unsure of yourself. You aim for just the right pace. Calm. Controlled. Like someone who knows exactly how many coins they have, and where they are. Confidence, sewn at the hip. Back in the alley, you pause to adjust the belt beneath your robe. The cord is coarse, tied with a loop knot you learned as a child. No buckles. No fasteners. Just friction and friction burns. You can feel your pouch bumping against your hip now as you walk. You wish it were stitched in. Less jangling. But sewing a full pocket into the outer robe? Too risky. Too obvious. Only the very rich can get away with that kind of flash. And even then, they don't carry their own money. That's what boys with shaved heads and poor judgment are for. But the concept? The idea of something attached directly to the garment? Oh, it's coming. Slowly. Awkwardly. Like someone's cousin at a wedding feast. But it's coming. Some say the earliest proper pockets show up in the late 13th century in France, stitched into men's hose or sewn into women's underlayers. But even that is debated. Was it really a pocket if you couldn't access it from outside? Or just a cloth cubbyhole for one sweaty handkerchief? Still, the robe you wear now, the one the tailor made with those hidden slits, is the midpoint of invention. Not quite past. Not quite future. Just enough room for a secret. But not enough for a sandwich. You sit by the fountain, the stone cold against your back. You nibble the crust of your bread and peer across the square. A man in a fine blue cloak strides by, gold trim, jeweled clasp, zero slits. His servant follows, sweating under a bundle of pouches and scrolls. You smile. You like your robe better. Your fingers brush against the inner pouch again, the hidden one, tied snug against your belt beneath the layers of wool. It's not much, just a coin or two, the flint, and that dried figure still debating whether to eat, but it feels like power. Quiet power. Because no one sees it, Yet it changes how you move, how you stand, how you think. And maybe that's the point of clothing in the Middle Ages. It's not just what you wear, it's who you get to be while wearing it. But don't get too comfortable. That lovely dark brown dye on your robe? It didn't come cheap. And it definitely didn't come guilt-free. Dyeing fabric in this era is as much chemistry as it is sin. You want something vibrant? Prepare to barter with blood, urine, or crushed bugs. The boldest reds? Extracted from cochineal beetles or madder root, boiled and mashed into a thick paste. That blue everyone swoons over? Woad. A stinky plant mashed and fermented into something that smells like old socks and regret. You once visited a dyer's workshop. It was behind the tannery, for reasons you now understand. The stench hits you before the door even opens. Inside, that's bubble like witches' cauldrons. The dyer himself wore gloves dyed a shade darker than his conscience. You asked about the deep crimson he was stirring. He just grunted and said, "Don't ask what's in it. Just know it costs more than your teeth." And here's the kicker, not everyone can wear every color. Not legally, anyway. You hear that humming? That's the soul of sumptuary law, whistling its way into your wardrobe. These were the regulations, sometimes church-led, sometimes kingly decrees, that dictated who got to wear what. And how. And how much. You're a cobbler? You don't wear silk. Farmer's son? No velvet for you. And if you're caught wearing a color reserved for the nobility, like Tyrian purple or certain shades of scarlet, you might be fined, whipped, or publicly shamed with a little plaque declaring pretended to be fancier than they are. Historians still argue whether these laws were rigorously enforced or just used as weapons when someone wanted to knock you down a peg. Either way, you play it safe. Browns, grays, muddy greens. You want to blend into the marketplace, not be hauled off by a bishop with fashion opinions. Still, the rich cheat. Of course they do. That merchant's wife in the velvet gown? Swore it was coarse wool and bribed 3 inspectors to nod and look away. The baron's cousin with the suspiciously silk-like sleeves? Technically it's spun spider floss from Flanders, whatever that means. And you? You learned to walk the tightrope. Your robe might be plain on the outside, but the lining? Just a whisper of color. Deep blue, dyed in secret by a traveling dyer who owed your tailor a favor. You only catch glimpses of it when the wind hits just right. But oh, it feels scandalous. Like slipping a joke into a sermon. Tailors, of course, love to toe the line. They get away with it more than you'd expect. Because when a duke orders a robe stitched to the brink of legality, who's going to say no? Not the tailor. Not when there's coin involved. And not when his family's dinner depends on that commission. You once saw a robe that looked gray in daylight and shimmered bronze under candlelight. Was that legal? Debatable. Was it magnificent? Absolutely. That's the real secret of medieval clothing. It's a performance. A coded dance between what you're allowed to wear and what you can get away with. You pass by a church on your way home, the bells ringing again. You swear they ring more than they pray. A monk stands outside, robe cinched at the waist, sandals dusty. Simple, yes. But not poor. That robe was dyed using hours of labor and gallons of, well, fermented things you'd rather not think about. He nods at you. You nod back. And for a moment, it's like your robes are nodding at each other too, speaking a language of weave, dye, and hem. You duck into an alley again, this time to avoid a patrol of city guards checking garments. Yes, that's a real thing. They glance at sleeve width, cloak length, even the sheen of your buttons. Too shiny, and they suspect you're aiming above your station. One guard is literally holding a color swatch, like a bureaucratic peacock. You tug your sleeves lower. Inside your robe, your pouch brushes against your thigh again. You grin. Let them check the outer shell. They'll never see what's tucked just underneath. You wake to the sound of clattering hooves and a rooster who clearly hates sleep. Your robe, now slightly wrinkled from being slept on like a blanket, is draped over the stool beside you, and you're cold. Very cold. Because medieval insulation is a joke, and your straw mattress mostly houses fleas and bad decisions. You rise, stretch, and immediately regret moving. Your shoulder aches from the time you tried to sew your own hem. You didn't even finish it. The needle broke halfway through, and your cousin blamed it on Tailor's spirits, which you're still not convinced wasn't just her excuse for stepping on it barefoot. You spend 10 minutes searching for your own needle before you realize it's still lodged in the thatch roof, flung there in a fit of rage last week. You consider climbing up to get it. Then you remember what happened last time someone tried that, Mad Alfred hasn't walked straight since. Tailors know this pain well. Needles were precious, and losing one could mean more than a ruined seam, it could mean a ruined week. These aren't cheap little plastic sewing kits from a corner shop. A good iron needle is hand-forged, slightly curved from use, and oiled with whatever greasy concoction is available. Often, animal fat. If you're lucky, you've got a bone case to keep them in. If not, you tie it into the hem of your tunic with a scrap of wool, whisper a little prayer, and hope it doesn't fall out during Sunday Massachusetts. Because if you lose a needle on the church floor, someone's going to accuse you of trying to curse the altar. Historians still argue whether these so-called lost needle superstitions were based on actual curses or just the frustration of repeatedly stabbing your own thigh through an unfinished pocket lining. You head toward the tailor's again, clutching your half-mended robe. Along the way, you pass a group of apprentices, young, grimy, and already bleeding from their fingers. That's the cost of learning. No soft starts. Your first day, you're handed a bundle of unfinished seams, a needle, and a silent look that says, "Don't die." Inside the workshop, it's chaos. The tailor is muttering something about damned sleeves while trying to pin a lining without skewering the client. You hear the distinct sound of thread snapping and the even more distinct sound of someone swearing in 3 languages. You take a seat near the back, where apprentices normally work. The table is covered in scraps, tiny pieces of fabric in 100 shades of earth and disappointment. This is where mistakes live. Misaligned edges, dropped stitches, holes bitten by mice or moths. And in the middle of it all sits the needle basket, guarded like treasure. You pluck a slightly bent one from the pile. Better than nothing. Threading it is a trial. You squint, lick the thread, miss the eye 5 times. On the 6th, it finally goes through, and you nearly cry from joy. The tailor catches your expression and laughs. "You'll be one of us soon," he says. Bitter, bent, and bleeding, but with the best damn stitches on the block. You practice on scrap linen first. Running stitch, back stitch, slip stitch. The names sound like old songs or sword moves. Every stitch has a rhythm. You learn to hum with it. The thread tightens just so. The fabric pulls, but not too much. It's meditation by injury. Lunch comes and goes, hard cheese and harder bread. Someone throws a chunk of onion at another apprentice. It sticks to the wall. You don't even blink. By afternoon, you're working on real fabric. Wool. Heavy, dense, and prone to fraying. You try to sew a neat edge and immediately jab your thumb. Blood. Again. You suck on it like a child and hope no one sees. But of course, they do. Everyone has done it. Some apprentices joke that the wool demands a blood tax. A fringe story? One tailor once stitched a whole hem using threads soaked in pig's blood to make the robe bow ready. He was promptly banned from the guild for being weird. But the robe? It looked incredible. Rich crimson, never faded. A walking thread. Your stitches improve. Slowly. Painfully. You start to understand why tailors hunch the way they do. Every seam is war, and the body curves to defend itself. Outside, the light dims. You're still working. The others have gone home. The tailor remains, of course, trimming a cloak that'll go to a night by morning. He doesn't speak. He just watches you. And then, after a long moment, he hands you a square of soft, worn velvet. "Pocket," he says. Your eyes widen. He wants you to sew one. A real one. You nod, trembling slightly. You press the fabric flat, pin it to the lining, and begin the slow, careful work of attaching it. Every stitch is a heartbeat. Every fold, a decision. By the time you're done, it's crooked and a little too tight, but it's yours. He doesn't say a word. He just nods once and hands you a fig. You eat it immediately. You wake the next morning with a thread stuck to your cheek and the taste of velvet fuzz in your mouth. Apparently, you nodded off at the tailor's table again, needles still tucked behind your ear, one hand resting protectively over the crooked pocket you stitched last night. It's small, imperfect, and barely functional, but it's there. And in medieval tailoring terms, that's a political statement. Because pockets, real ones, stitched right into the garment, aren't just rare. They're problematic. You don't think about it at first, but as you cradle your aching hands and stretch your spine back into its original shape, you remember something the tailor muttered last week: too many pockets invite questions. And that's where sumptuary laws rear their finely embroidered heads again. You're starting to understand these laws aren't just about color or length, they're about control. how much fabric you use, how wide you cut the sleeves, how many fasteners at your chest, all monitored. Because in the mind of a medieval ruler, if a butcher's son dresses like a noble, the whole hierarchy starts to unravel. And you? You just made a robe with a pocket. Not a pouch. Not a belt tie-on. A pocket. A little stitched rebellion. Historians still argue whether sumptuary laws were genuinely enforced outside of large cities, or if rural folk mostly ignored them unless the church or tax collectors were watching. But in towns like yours, where the guilds whisper to the clergy and the clergy glares at the mayor, people notice these things. Your pocket might as well be a manifesto. It's still early when you head to the guild hall. Not because you've been summoned, yet, but because the tailor wants to submit your robe for review. That means inspection. Official eyes. Possibly fines. Definitely gossip. The hall smells like beeswax, cold stone, and nervous ambition. 2 other tailors are already there, presenting their creations, a crimson doublet with pearl buttons, risky, and a woman's gown with 10 layers of pleated skirt, absurd. You feel like a muddy sheep among swans. But then they call your name. You walk forward, robe held like a child in your arms. One of the guild scribes steps up, ink-stained and perpetually annoyed. He pokes at the fabric, sniffs it, rubs it between 2 fingers like it just insulted his mother. Then he finds it. The pocket. What's this? He asks. You freeze. The tailor clears his throat behind you. An interior utility flap, sir, he says smoothly. For a traveling client. Designed for parchment, possibly a tally stick. Not for coin. The scribe narrows his eyes. Still stitched directly into the robe. Not a permitted alteration under the Articles of 1323. You want to vanish. You want to melt into the floor and become a forgotten smear beneath a wardrobe. Then, the guild master speaks. He's ancient, wrapped in velvet so thick he might be part armchair. His eyes gleam like someone who's seen things unravel, literally and politically. Let me see it, he rasps. You hand over the robe. He runs his fingers along the seam. Taps the corner of the pocket. Hums. This is good work, he says. Clean stitch. Reinforced edge. Lining double-stitched. You nod mutely. He leans back. Not a common edition, but not offensive. If it's meant for parchment, not coin, I see no breach. He hands it back. The robe is warm where his hands touched it. Keep your needle straight, he adds, then closes his eyes. You exhale. Hard. That could have gone much worse. Like, fined into starvation worse. Back outside, the tailor claps your shoulder. See, he grins. History's stitched by rebels with good hands. You laugh, quietly, cautiously. But it feels good. Back at the workshop, the other apprentices gather around. One of them asks to see the pocket. You show them. They marvel. One whistles. Another swears you'll be arrested within a week. You get back to work. There are sleeves to repair, buttons to attach, hems to straighten. The rhythm of stitching returns, like a heartbeat behind your ribs. But now, your robe hangs in the corner, real pocket and all, like a silent little triumph. In the days that follow, whispers ripple through town. Not accusations. Questions. Other tailors start asking about interior flaps. A merchant wants one sewn into his travel cloak. A baker's wife commissions a hidden cloth compartment in her apron. You started a trend. One that might just change everything. One stitch at a time. The days slip by in a haze of thread and thimbles. Your fingers now bear a constellation of pinpricks, and you no longer flinch when a needle grazes your skin. That's just part of the job. You bleed, you nod, you curse under your breath like a proper apprentice. But something else is changing. People are starting to notice your robe. Or rather, what's in your robe? You're in the town square again when it happens. A duke's valet brushes past you, nearly toppling a sack of turnips. He glances down at your hemline, notices the slight bulge near your hip where the pocket sits hidden, and arches one perfectly plucked brow. A traveler's slit? He asks. You nod. He pauses, then murmurs, clever. And that's it. No guards. No fines. No lectures about social order. Just clever. That night, back in the workshop, you help the tailor with something truly dreadful, dressing a duke. The robe is already finished, of course, dark blue with gold embroidery and a collar so stiff it could slice cheese, but dukes don't dress themselves. That's your job. And it's as glamorous as threading eels. The Duke arrives in a whirlwind of perfume and irritation, muttering about rival's wedding and his own gout. He doesn't speak to you directly. He just raises his arms and waits, like a statue that complains. You hoist the robe carefully, threading it over his shoulders while trying not to gag from the overpowering scent of lavender, sweat, and what might be moldy cloves. The fabric glides over his embroidered undershirt, and you start fastening the inner ties. That's when you catch it. A hidden slit, high on the inner lining. Not yours. His. You pause for just a second. Enough to let the thought settle. The Duke has a pocket. Not a belt pouch. Not an undergarment satchel. A tailor-stitched pocket in the robe itself. You glance at the tailor. He says nothing. Just meets your gaze and gives the faintest nod, like a wink in slow motion. Of course. The rich always get to bend the rules. Historians still argue whether nobility had personal tailors who routinely broke sumptuary laws for them, or if guild records simply omitted those jobs as gifts or exceptions. But seeing it now, with your own eyes, it's clear, the rules only matter if you don't have power. The Duke adjusts the robe in the mirror. Snug at the shoulders. Good. He tugs at the sleeves. A little tight. Fashionably so. Then he dips 2 fingers into that hidden slit and withdraws a ring. Large. Ornate. Possibly stolen from his second cousin. He slips it on his hand with the casualness of someone tying a shoe. No one gasps. No one shouts. This is normal. You finish the fitting and step back. The Duke doesn't say thank you. He never does. He just leaves, sweeping out the door in a cloud of silent entitlement and the lingering smell of rosemary. You turn to the tailor. You stitched that pocket? You ask. Of course I did, he replies. He paid triple. Isn't it illegal? He shrugs. So is being rich and stupid, but here we are. That night, you can't stop thinking about it. The hypocrisy. The quiet rebellion. The stitched privilege sewn into velvet and worn like a secret weapon. You sit by the hearth and patch the elbow of your own robe. The fabric is thinning from use. Your pocket's still intact, though. A little tighter, maybe, from all the things you've tucked into it lately. Thread, folded scraps of notes, once a small spoon for reasons you no longer remember. And then you wonder, could a pocket carry more than objects? Could it carry intent? That same week, you receive your strangest commission yet. A scholar from the monastery appears at the workshop, robes trailing behind him like shadowy wings. He speaks quietly, urgently. He wants a robe. Sturdy. Simple. With 4 hidden pockets. 4, you ask, blinking. He nods. 2 for herbs. 1 for wax tablets. And 1 for letters. You don't ask questions. You just sew. Late at night, with the candles burning low and the room hushed, you fold the fabric and begin. Stitch by stitch. Seam by seam. You build a robe that holds secrets. Not just objects, but knowledge. Historians still argue whether such robes were used by monks as message carriers or whether this was rare, even heretical behavior. But as your needle glides through cloth, you know this one is special. When it's done, the scholar returns. He runs his fingers over the seams, tests the hidden slits, and finally tucks a rolled parchment into one. Perfect, he says. And then he disappears into the night. You never see him again. But a month later, a new edict is posted at the town square. All monastic robes must be inspected before travel. You smile. Too late. The pocket revolution has already begun. You stand in the workshop doorway the next morning, sipping lukewarm barley tea and staring at a pile of garments awaiting final touches. Sleeves to hem, cuffs to reinforce, and buttons, so many buttons, to fasten. Or rather, to create. Because in this century, buttons aren't just practical. They're status symbols. And like most things in medieval fashion, they lie through their tiny, symmetrical teeth. You sit at the work table, already resigned to the task ahead. The tailor plops down a small wooden bowl filled with buttons, bone, wood, tin, and the occasional glass one if the client's feeling bold. Some are carved with intricate patterns. Others look like angry lumps of bread dough. They all have one thing in common, they're basically decorative lies. See, buttons in the early Middle Ages didn't really button anything. They were often just sewn on for show, little jewels of deception that told the world, look at me, I'm fashionable and definitely not poor. Fasteners? That job still mostly fell to laces, pins, or strips of cloth tied with elaborate knots that only 3 people in town understood. You hold one up. A carved wooden button shaped like a rose. You smile. Last week, someone paid half a go for one of these. 1. Tailoring in these times isn't just clothing people, it's clothing their egos, insecurities, and bank accounts. The more buttons you have, the richer you look. But add functional buttons? That's a step too far. Buttons that actually close a tunic are considered foreign in many places, especially when they're on the front. You know what that suggests? Easy undressing. Historians still argue whether the church opposed functional front buttons because they symbolized vanity or accessibility, but let's just say that once enough nuns start whispering about sinful fastenings, buttons get suspicious real fast. You finish sewing 3 decorative buttons onto a merchant's overcoat, knowing full well he'll brag about them at the tavern. He'll probably say they came from Venice. They came from a box under your bench, but let him dream. The tailor gestures for you to bring over a blue tunic next, this one for a night with more coin than taste. It's got side slits, a double lining, and, bless his heart, real fasteners hidden beneath the decorative ones. That's where you come in. You reach for the basket of tie cords, linen, wool, and the prized stash, gut string. Yes, that kind of gut. Animal intestines, scraped, cleaned, twisted, and dried until they're firm enough to bind clothing or nightmares. They don't fray. They don't snap easily. And they smell, faintly. Not enough to call the priest, but enough to keep you awake if you use them near your face. You cut 2 cords to size and begin lacing the sides of the tunic through tiny eyelets sewn into the lining. Each knot must be exact, tight enough to hold, loose enough to be untied in a hurry, in case the knight finds himself suddenly too warm. Or stabbed. And now comes the deception. Over these practical, boring gut ties, you sew 5 elaborate silver buttons, completely useless, but dazzling under candlelight. No one will know what actually holds the tunic together. Fashion, you realize, is a performance wrapped in a trick and stitched with a lie. The tailor walks by and grunts in approval. Good tension, he mutters, tugging at one of your stitches. Wouldn't want his guts falling out. You blink. Literal guts, or... He just smirks. Later that day, a noblewoman arrives with a problem. Her overcloak doesn't speak loudly enough at banquets. What she means is, it doesn't make people stare. She wants a new clasp, something with sparkle. You rummage through the embellishment box and offer her a small brass toggle. She recoils like you offered her a rat. Gemstone, she hisses. So now you're sewing a quartz bead onto a velvet collar and wondering how many peasants that could have fed. The answer is, probably 3. 4, if they weren't picky. She also wants decorative fasteners, but only on the left side. The right, she says, must stay smooth, for prayer. You don't ask questions. You just stitch. You've begun to notice a pattern. The more powerful the client, the more absurd their tailoring requests. You've sewn hidden compartments, false seams, even one robe that had an interior pocket designed to hold nothing, just in case the winds of fashion shifted. Whatever that means. Somewhere around sunset, you look at your hands, ink-stained, thread-dusted, and permanently curled from holding cloth too long. You flex your fingers and try not to imagine a future where they never fully straighten. Then you reach into your robe and feel the reassuring weight of your pocket. Still there. Still yours. A quiet rebellion stitched in wool and stubbornness. And tomorrow? You'll sew buttons that lie better than any courtier. The chill bites at your fingertips as dawn creeps through the warped glass of the workshop's only window. You hunch over your stool, robe wrapped around your shoulders, needle poised midair. But your hands hesitate. Because today isn't just any day. Today, the master tailor hands you your first commission. Not a scrap repair. Not a sleeve to hem or a cuff to fix. A full robe. For an actual paying client. And not just any client, a merchant's daughter, recently engaged, who wants something elegant but modest, structured yet flowing, and, your personal favorite, a little magical. No pressure. You take the measurements yourself, trying to hide how badly your hands are shaking. She's polite. Not noble, but close enough to count herself important. She wants green. Forest green. The color of moss, ambition, and jealousy. The tailor gives you a bolt of homespun wool dyed and wove and overdyed with weld to give it a deeper hue, expensive stuff. As you measure, pin, and mark, the other apprentices stare. One mouths don't mess it up. You whisper to the fabric like it's a frightened animal, pleading with it to lie flat, to curve where it should and hold where it must. You line the robe with a soft linen, something that won't itch. Then comes the trickiest part, the interior details. She requested a discreet place for her engagement token, a ring too valuable to wear, too risky to carry in a pouch. You know what she means. A pocket. But not just any pocket. This one has to be invisible, secure, and symbolic. She asked for it to be near the heart. You sit at the workbench, sketching patterns on scrap parchment. One design has a diagonal slit, hidden beneath a pleated seam. Another mimics the inside fold of a sleeve. You settle on a small, heart-shaped pouch stitched into the inner lining of the bodice, sweet, simple, and subtle. You cut the fabric, carefully curve the lining, and start the slow, meditative stitching. Every thread pulls like a violin string. The robe starts to take shape, not just in form, but in personality. It's delicate, but determined. Elegant, but not vain. You almost like it more than your own. Historians still argue whether tailoring apprentices had full design rights or if masters secretly redid their work behind closed doors. Your tailor doesn't. He watches. He waits. But he doesn't correct unless you really mess up. Which you almost do. Halfway through the side seam, your thread snags and tears a small hole in the outer wool. Your stomach drops. It's tiny, barely the size of a thimble, but you can see it. You freeze, needle suspended midair. The tailor glances over. Then, slowly, he walks to the back of the shop and returns with something odd, a patch made of silk. It's gold, embroidered with a tiny leaf. He hands it to you silently. You sew it over the hole. Later, he explains, she'll think it's decorative. Her mother will assume it was intentional. Everyone else will wonder where she got it. That's tailoring. Not just fixing things. Framing them as features. The day of the final fitting arrives. The girl returns, her eyes wide as she slips the robe on. You help her adjust the belt. Tuck the lining just right. She runs a hand over the fabric and sighs. It's perfect, she says. Then she reaches beneath the fold, finds the secret pocket near the heart, and smiles. So safe, she whispers. You don't speak. You just nod. When she leaves, you collapse onto the nearest stool. Every muscle in your back screams. Your hands feel like they've wrestled hedgehogs. But your chest? Warm. Your first robe. Worn. Paid for. Loved. The tailor says nothing. Just slaps your shoulder once and tosses you a half-dried fig. The highest praise. That night, after the candles burn low, you take out your own robe again. Run your fingers along your pocket seam. It's gotten loose from wear, stretched from use. You unpick the stitches. Then you sew it anew, cleaner, tighter, better. It's still the same robe. But now, it feels different. You smile. Then immediately prick your thumb on the needle. Again. Rain drums softly on the tiled roof, each drop a tiny lullaby for the weary bones beneath. You're seated near the window now, mending a sleeve by candlelight, watching the rivulets run down the warped glass like threads unraveling from the sky. The shop smells like damp wool and burnt onion pie. Someone tried to cook again in the back room, and predictably, failed. But you barely notice. Because this morning, something unusual happened. A courier arrived. Not a loud one. Not a royal herald with a trumpet and the scent of entitlement. Just a quiet man in a hooded cloak, damp from the journey, carrying a sealed letter in beeswax-stamped parchment. The tailor read it with an expression you couldn't quite decipher, somewhere between irritation and reluctant curiosity. Then he handed it to you. Apprentice work, he muttered. But not just sewing. The job? A messenger robe. Traveling gear. Built for long distances, long hours, and possibly long silences. The robe had to be weatherproof, unobtrusive, and, here's the twist, designed for secrecy. More than just a pocket. This robe needed compartments. You sit now with the pattern sketched out on your lap, double lining, reinforced shoulders, overlapping flaps to deflect rain, and at least 3 concealed areas to tuck letters, coins, and something oddly specific, a small wax seal kit. Why? You don't ask. That's rule 1 of tailoring for clients who pay an untraceable coin and whisper through closed doors. You begin with the outer layer, undyed wool treated with a lanolin rub to repel water. It smells faintly of sheep and ash, but it holds up better than anything else. Then comes the inner lining, coarse linen with reinforced seams. The fun part? sewing the compartments. One goes under the armpit, hidden behind a stitched pleat, accessible only if you know where to press. Another near the hem, wide enough for a parchment scroll but narrow enough to lie flat. And the third? In the collar. A tiny slit just big enough for a ring or wax stick. Historians still argue whether such robes were standard issue for messengers or if they were the clever inventions of paranoid tailors with overly ambitious clients. Either way, you've now made one. By the second day, your hands move with purpose. The compartments vanish into the folds. You run your palm down the finished back, and it looks like just a robe. Which is exactly the point. The courier returns. He tries it on without a word. Twists. Bends. Reaches beneath the hem and removes a fake scroll you tucked there for testing. He nods once. Then he hands you a silver coin, too clean for someone who sleeps on hay, and disappears into the rain. You sit back, candlelight flickering across your face. This isn't the tailoring you imagined when you first threaded a needle. Back then, you dreamed of noble robes and wedding gowns. But this? Secret linings and sealed compartments? This is a different kind of noble. A noble of shadows. A few days later, 2 guards show up asking if anyone's seen a man in a wool robe with a suspicious hem. The tailor yawns, hands them a child's tunic with a comically wide hem, and says, "You mean this one?" They glare. But they leave. You return to your stool, suppressing a grin. Tailoring, it turns out, has more in common with thievery than most would guess. The difference? You leave your mark in thread, not footprints. That evening, as the workshop quiets and the apprentices scatter, the tailor pulls something from a hidden drawer. A robe. Old. Faded. But with the finest hidden pocket you've ever seen, stitched with silk thread so fine you'd mistake it for a wrinkle. He lays it on the table. "My master made this during the war," he says. "Carried letters for the resistance. Got caught. Spent 3 years in a dungeon. They never found the pocket." You run your hand over the seam. "Did he survive?" The tailor nods. "Died of old age. In his garden. With a needle in one hand and a bead in the other." You both laugh, quietly. And then, the tailor lifts the robe and hands it to you. "For reference," he says. "And because pockets deserve apprentices who understand what they're really for." You fold it carefully. Reverently. Like it's a relic. Because in a way, it is. The workshop's air is thick with dust motes and heated wool. A shaft of light filters through the window just right, catching in the folds of a new project, your next test. A doublet. And not just any doublet. This one's for a man who wants to look braver, taller, and less round than he really is. So naturally, he's asked for padding. Lots of it. You weigh the pile of linen stuffing like it's a sleeping animal that might bite. The tailor watches you from the back of the room, arms crossed, the ghost of a smirk on his face. He's waiting for you to realize the full absurdity of what's about to unfold. You get to work. The base structure of the doublet isn't too different from a tunic, but everything about it screams illusion. A snug fit through the torso. Tight shoulders. High collar. Reinforced sleeves to create the impression of muscular arms without ever having to lift a sack of barley. You line the chest first, 2 layers of soft linen, stitched in careful loops, then filled with folded batting. Not too much, or it bulges. Too little, and it flattens. The goal is noble firmness, not cabbage roll. Next, you pad the sides. Carefully. Strategically. The idea is to shape a slight V silhouette, tricking the eye into thinking this man has the torso of a tournament champion and not a barrel. Historians still argue whether such artificial shaping in male garments began with vanity or necessity, whether men wanted to look powerful in court, or whether their armor just left strange muscle expectations afterward. Either way, you're now reverse engineering confidence with nothing but fabric and thread. Now for the most delicate part, hip padding. Yes, hips. It's subtle. A small lift. An illusion of proportion. If you've never heard of men in the 14th century shaping their hips with rolled cloth and stiffened seams, then clearly you've never been to a courtly dance. The man arrives for a fitting. Middle-aged. Bearded. Nervous. He eyes the doublet as if it might insult him, then slips into it with exaggerated care. You help him tie it close. Step back. Adjust the shoulders. And there it is. The transformation. He stands straighter. Chin lifts. He turns slightly, catching his profile in a warped bronze mirror hanging by the fire. His eyebrows rise. It makes me look stronger, he says, stunned. You smile. You are stronger. It just helps others notice. And that's the trick, isn't it? Tailors don't just clothe bodies. They frame perceptions. A man wants to feel noble, so you pat his pride and cinch his doubts. A merchant wants to seem richer, so you stitch gold thread into cuffs he'll keep hidden until he needs them most. A girl wants to carry a secret ring without fear, so you build her a heart pocket no thief will ever find. You think about your own robe. Still simple. Still sturdy. But lately, heavier. Heavier with the weight of what you now know, that fashion isn't decoration. It's identity management. And in medieval society, where you couldn't change your last name, or your class, or where you were born, your clothes were the closest thing you had to a disguise, or a declaration. The padded man thanks you awkwardly, fumbling a coin into your hand. He leaves walking taller than when he arrived. You know the effect will fade. A week, maybe. But the garment? That illusion? That stays with him. The next commission comes before you've even cleaned up the scraps, another doublet. This one for a younger man, slimmer, more flamboyant. He wants something with flair. You sigh. Out comes the lace, the contrast piping, the exaggerated shoulders. He even asks for detachable sleeves so he can adjust to the weather, or the audience. He winks when he says it. You just nod and make a mental note to reinforce the seams. People who wink always tear seams. Later that night, you share a mug of thin ale with the tailor by the fire. He chuckles when you recount the requests. Patting hips, he murmurs. Makes you wonder what's real anymore. You sip. Does it matter? He leans back, eyes gleaming in the firelight. Not really. Most people don't want the truth. They want to be believed. Outside, the moonlight slants through the window. Inside, you fold the padded doublet and tuck it into the delivery basket. And somewhere in your mind, you start sketching your own version. Not for a client, but for yourself. The first chill of autumn arrives not with frost, but with silence. Fewer carts in the square. Shorter sermons. Fewer complaints about heat and sweat. The tailor's workshop takes on a new hum, subdued, focus. Everyone's preparing for winter, which means thicker wool, heavier linings, and commissions that sound more like survival plans than fashion requests. You're working on a cloak when the door creaks open and a man you've never seen steps in. He's not local, that's clear from the way he glances over his shoulder before entering, like someone who expects to be followed. His robe is nondescript, yet too clean. His boots, travel-worn, but recently resoled. And his voice, when he speaks, is quiet and clipped. I need a traveling robe, he says, with discreet internal access. You raise an eyebrow. For comfort? No, he says, for movement. And for storage. He places a small pouch of coin on the table. Enough for a week's worth of orders. The tailor doesn't blink. He just points to you. Apprentice will take this one. Your mouth goes dry. The man hands over a folded scrap of parchment, no name, just measurements and 3 odd annotations. Left shoulder padding hollow. Back pleat should hold wax packet. Lower hem, slit, non-visible. You feel the weight of it instantly. This isn't tailoring. This is espionage. Historians still argue whether tailors were actively involved in political schemes or simply provided services to those who were. But one thing's clear, medieval garments could hide far more than flesh. You cut the fabric, a thick, slate gray wool that looks dull in daylight and nearly vanishes under moonlight. The kind of robe that's invisible in the crowd without being suspicious. The kind worn by monks, low-ranking scholars, or people pretending to be both. You reinforce the shoulders with extra lining but leave one slightly hollow, as requested. It's not enough space for a weapon, but a wax seal or a rolled message. Easily. The back pleat is next. You sew it looser than necessary, creating a small cavity behind the fabric. Then you stitch a flap that closes flat unless deliberately tugged from the inside. Finally, the hem slit. It's a marvel, really. You sew it so precisely, not even you can spot it without knowing where to look. The inner slit is lined in black. The outside appears seamless. It opens to a pouch that runs the entire length of the robe's rear, long enough to hide a scroll, a dagger, or something smaller but equally dangerous. As you stitch the final seam, you feel a quiet thrill. This is no wedding robe. This isn't pageantry. This is function disguised as form. When the man returns, he doesn't try it on in the shop. Just runs his fingers along the seams, nods once, and tucks a small coin into your palm. "You so like someone who listens," he says. And then he's gone. You stare at the door for a long moment. That night, you lay awake, wondering what he'll carry. Maybe a message that changes a king's mind. Or a name that gets someone executed. Or perhaps just a single word, stitched tightly into the seams of history: resistance. You ask the tailor about it the next day. He doesn't answer at first. Just keeps threading a needle. Finally, he says, "We make things that last. What people do in them, that's their stitch to bear." Later, while organizing scraps, you find a bundle of old parchment patterns tucked behind a cabinet. One of them, aged, yellowed, shows a robe design with 6 internal pockets, one labeled false lining, dated 15 years ago. Your tailor's name is on it. You put it back quietly, and realize you're learning from a man who once stitched history into cloth, and survived. You're elbow deep in satin and shame when the next commission arrives. The client's voice precedes him, loud, boastful, and a little too pleased with himself. He sweeps into the workshop like a man stepping onto a stage, pausing just inside the door so the sunlight can catch the enormous ruby pinned to his chest. You're not sure which glitters more, his jewelry or his smile. He's here for a codpiece. You try not to blink too obviously. Codpieces are complicated. Functionally, they're a triangular flap or pouch covering the front opening of men's hose, modesty panels, in theory. But in practice, they've become statements. Peacocks have tails. Nobles have codpieces. The tailor sighs. "You're up, apprentice." "Great." You pull out the hose pattern and the heavy velvet he's brought, black, embroidered, utterly ridiculous. He sits, legs spread with confidence, and begins describing his vision: gold thread trim, pearl buttons, and just enough padding to make a comment without saying a word. You smile politely while mentally unpicking your dignity. Codpieces didn't start out flashy. Early designs were simple, meant to bridge the gap between hose legs as the fashion shifted toward tighter and tighter fits. A practical solution. But then came vanity. And now, they're full-blown bragging rights. You measure discreetly, then very discreetly. You cut a base panel from sturdy wool, then overlay it with the requested velvet. Padding comes next, a carefully sewn roll of batting, curved and bound. It's not quite sculpture, but it feels like it. Historians still argue whether oversized codpieces were a joke, a flirtation, or a legitimate symbol of masculinity in fashion. You suspect the answer is yes to all three. You once saw a bard wear one shaped like a griffin. It squawked when he walked. Your client watches as you stitch the seams, occasionally offering helpful input like, "Can we make it prouder?" or "I want people to know I'm here before I say anything." You resist the urge to sew your needle through your own hand. Once constructed, the codpiece is laced to the hose. Functional, yes, but also removable. Many are designed to be unfastened quickly, and not always for practical reasons. It's no secret that nobles like to flirt via fashion, and nothing flirts quite like a bedazzled declaration at eye level. When the client stands for final fitting, he struts. Actually struts. Then he turns, appraises himself in the mirror, and grins. "Perfect," he says. "Strong. Regal. Slightly dangerous." You nod. It's certainly memorable. He tosses a coin on the table. "Have one made for my cousin." He's insecure. Once he leaves, the tailor chuckles. "Used to be they wore tunics long enough to hide that sort of thing," he says, wiping his hands. "Now they want arrows pointing to it." You shake your head. "Fashion's weird." "No," he says. "Fashion's honest. Just not in the way people think." You spend the rest of the evening cleaning up stray velvet scraps and wondering how society came to a point where dignity hangs from a drawstring. You pause by the window, looking out over the square. A group of boys chases each other past the well, all dressed in hand-me-downs 2 sizes too big. Their laughter echoes up to your perch. And you realize something else. For all its pomp and pageantry, tailoring is still about one thing: visibility. Whether it's a hidden slit or a flamboyant codpiece, every stitch says, "Look at me," or "Don't." You touch the pocket inside your robe again. Still there. Still silent. Still powerful in its invisibility. It makes you wonder, what would happen if everyone's clothes told the truth? Then again, maybe that's what the codpiece is trying to do, badly, loudly, and with pearls. You're squinting at a frayed neckline under candlelight when the door swings open with the kind of hesitance that smells like trouble. She steps inside slowly, hood low, cloak damp, and eyes darting around the shop like every spool of thread is a possible spy. You've seen this look before. Fear in silk gloves. She pulls back her hood just enough for you to see the pale curve of her cheek, the glint of a bronze brooch, shaped like a crescent moon. Witch's crescent, some might call it. But in the right circles, it just means midwife, herbalist, woman who knows things. She sets down a satchel and speaks in a voice like cracked paper. I need a gown, she says. With extra folds. Long sleeves. Hidden fastenings. You glance at the tailor. He gives the tiniest nod. You're on this one. As you take her measurements, wrist to wrist, shoulder to hip, she explains in slow, careful words. She travels often. She works with herbs. Sometimes, she visits places that don't want her seen. You nod. You've heard the stories. Historians still argue whether women's fashion in the Middle Ages restricted movement intentionally, or if it simply evolved that way through layer after modest layer. But one thing is certain, tailoring for women is political. A hem too high? Scandal. A neckline too low? Temptation. A skirt that moves too freely? Witchcraft. You start with dark wool, softened with brushing, dyed a muted plum, safe from scrutiny but rich under firelight. The sleeves are long, but lined with linen for movement. You stitch extra folds into the skirt, fluid, but thick enough to hide a small pouch or two. She requests slits under the arms. Not for fashion. For access. In case she needs to reach her belt without lifting her cloak. You oblige. The stitches are tight, nearly invisible. But her fingers will find them. Then comes the special request. I need a pouch stitched into the lining, she says, voice quieter now. Flat. Breathable. Big enough for leaves. Or coins. Or, she hesitates, roots. You understand. You've worked with traveling scholars, messengers. A herbalist who deals in dried wolfsbane and powdered bark. No more suspicious than a bishop's cellar key. Unless someone wants it to be. You sew the pocket near her hip, angled downward so its contents won't fall if she runs. You add a small hidden button, bone, plain, but secure. When the gown is finished, she tries it on in silence. You help her adjust the shoulders, tighten the belt. She slides her hand through the underarm slit, tests the pocket. Perfect. She pays in coin and something stranger, a single dried lavender sprig. For protection, she says. Or perfume. After she leaves, the tailor speaks. She won't come back, he says. They rarely do. You frown. Why not? He picks up a spool of black thread. Because in towns like this, modesty is expected. Knowledge is feared. And tailoring for women? It's a dance between what they need and what won't get them drowned. Later that week, a priest stops by the shop. Not for robe. For gossip. He asks whether you've seen any unusual visitors. Women, especially. With strange requests. You shake your head. You don't mention the plum gown, or the pocket, or the woman who moved like wind through reeds. You don't mention the crescent pin. You sew a hem while he talks. Smile at the right moments. Nod as he warns you about the dangers of prideful seamstresses. As he leaves, you think, you don't need to hide a dagger in a robe to make it dangerous. Sometimes, a well-placed pocket is enough. The bell at the abbey tolls 12 times, each chime floating across the rooftops like a scolding. You glance up from your work just long enough to register the time, then return to the coarse, brown robe stretched across your lap. It's stiff, smells faintly of wet hay, and scratches like it resents being touched. Monk's habit. The tailor calls it the easiest commission, but you know better now. Simplicity, you've learned, is the most complicated illusion of all. The cloth is undyed wool, plain, rough, and about as luxurious as sandpaper on a windy day. It's not supposed to feel good. It's supposed to remind the wearer of humility, of poverty, of discipline. You try not to let your hands ache with the irony while stitching perfectly even hems for a man who owns 3 chalices. You cut the cowl, wide and low, with a deep hood that conceals the face but not the intentions. Then the sleeves. Straight, no frills. A robe for prayer, for silence, for denial of the body. You reinforce the hem. Not because monks run, but because they walk. A lot. And dragging the bottom through every puddle of sin-soaked earth will withdraw anything, even divine intention. The monastery sends a young initiate to collect the habit. He looks about 15 and already has the eyes of someone who's memorized too many Latin declensions and not enough jokes. He fidgets while you adjust the belt, just a braided rope, no clasp, no metal, no luxury. Functional. Restrictive. Symbolic. He tests the sleeves, moving his arms with small, deliberate motions. Too long, you ask. He hesitates. They're supposed to be. You nod. You understand. Historians still argue whether monastic garments were intentionally uncomfortable as a form of penance, or simply practical hand-me-downs from older traditions. Either way, discomfort becomes devotion. At least publicly. But you've seen monks shift and scratch in private. You've patched holes in habits worn down by constant kneeling. You've stitched secret linings into the inner folds of robes, soft linen panels that don't chafe, just enough to stop the skin from blistering. You once asked the tailor if that was cheating. Comfort, he said, is not a sin. But pretending you don't need it might be. You add one now, a narrow strip of linen at the neckline. The young monk won't see it, but he'll feel it. A small mercy in a world that doesn't hand out many. After he leaves, you sit by the window, your fingers threading through a pile of requests from the abbey. Most are minor repairs. A tear in a scapular. A frayed cuff. One particularly odd request. A secret pocket stitched into the inside of a hood. You raise an eyebrow at that one. The tailor shrugs. Probably smuggling almonds. Or forbidden books. You do it anyway. It's a tiny fold, barely larger than your palm. Hidden under the cowl's curve, lined with felt to muffle sound. Whatever goes inside will stay there, undetected. Unless someone knows where to press. A week later, one of the monks returns. Not for tailoring, but to deliver a letter. You open it when no one's looking. Just one line. Your kindness in stitches has not gone unnoticed. No signature. You fold it and slip it into your own pocket. That evening, the tailor tells stories. He's in one of his rare moods, soft, wandering, almost nostalgic. He talks about a robe he made for a monk-turned-poet who used to sew scraps of forbidden verse into his sleeves. Said if they burned him, the tailor chuckles, he'd at least go up in metaphors. You laugh too, but quietly. Because now you're starting to understand something strange. The more restrictive the garment, the more freedom people find in its hidden spaces. The humbler the robe, the louder the secrets it carries. You glance at your own robe again, your faithful companion. Your quiet armor. You tug it tighter around your shoulders, fingers brushing that inner pocket. It doesn't hold much, but it holds enough. The sky is the color of melted pewter when the blacksmith bursts into the workshop. He's not a man given to urgency, usually takes 10 minutes just to finish a sentence, but today, he's red-faced, out of breath, and holding a torn leather strap in one callous hand. You've seen that look before. Something's gone wrong. And it's heavy. I need a surcoat. By morning, he wheezes. For the militia. You blink. A surcoat? Sturdy. Can go over mail. Pockets for rations. And something to cover this. He gestures to his stomach with a vague circular motion. Nobody needs to see that wobble. You nod. He leaves the fabric choice to you and limps out, grumbling about arrows and mashed peas. As you prep the wool canvas, you realize this isn't just tailoring. This is war work. And that changes everything. In medieval battles, tailors weren't just hemming banners and stitching noble crests. They followed armies. They mended surcoats torn by pikes. They reinforced seams so gear wouldn't tear mid-charge. They stitched leather patches over chainmail breaks and sometimes used waxed thread to stop bleeding faster than a physician could mutter a Latin prayer. Historians still argue whether tailors were officially embedded with fighting forces or simply conscripted on demand. But battlefield tailoring was real, vital, and very, very messy. You cut the surcoat in thick wool, a dusty brown that won't show dirt, blood, or shame. No frills. Just a clean, angular cut with wide shoulders and a high collar to deflect both wind and gossip. You reinforce the seams with double stitching. Add slits at the sides for movement. Then, as requested, you sew 2 modest interior pouches near the hips, just big enough for dried meat, flint, or a tightly folded will. You pause, needle in hand. Then, on impulse, you stitch in a third pocket. Tiny. Hidden under the flap at the back. Not for weapons. For hope. Inside, you tuck a small linen scrap with a stitched X. No one will see it unless they're looking. But it's there. A mark. A prayer, maybe. A signature of sorts. The tailor peers over your shoulder and grunts. Never made one? You shake your head. Not for battle. He nods, slowly. You will again. You don't ask how he knows. You just keep sewing. By dusk, the surcoat is done. You hold it up, plain, boxy, unremarkable. But sturdy. Reliable. Honest. It won't make the blacksmith faster, or braver. But it might give him one less thing to worry about. He returns just before curfew. Tries it on silently. Tests the fit. Nods once. Doesn't smile. But he leaves behind a coin and a small leather pouch of peppered beef. For thanks, he says. And maybe luck. You wrap the meat in cloth and hang the coin above your bench. That night, you dream of battlefields, not swords and glory, but torn seams, mud-slicked hems, and hastily sewn stitches that hold lives together for one more march. The next day, 2 new commissions arrive, both for archers. Lighter tunics. Reinforced sleeves for bow tension. A lining for a quiver belt. You get to work. The rhythm is the same, but the weight is different. These aren't gowns for dances. They're uniforms for people walking toward danger. And all you can do is make sure their clothing doesn't give up before they do. Later, as you clean your tools, you find a loose thread stuck to your sleeve. You pluck it free and tuck it into your own pocket. One more hidden thing, in a world where seams hold more than fabric. The morning mist hasn't even lifted when the tailor unrolls a bolt of unfamiliar fabric on the work table. It's rougher than anything you've handled in weeks, crisscrossed with bold lines and uneven checks, dizzying, almost. You run your fingers across it. It smells faintly of peat smoke and travel. Tartan, he mutters. Highland stuff. Family patterns. Touchy business. You raise an eyebrow. You've heard of tartan, of course, but mostly through stories. Tales from the northern borders. Cloth that talks louder than words. A single stripe in the wrong color and you've declared yourself friend or enemy without saying a thing. Who's it for, you ask? Someone who didn't give a name, he says, but paid in solid silver, and asked for a cloak with removable clasps. That's not suspicious at all. You begin work. Tartan, unlike most fabrics you're used to, means something before you've even cut it. Every color, every stripe is a clan badge, a territorial marker, a loud whisper in the ears of those who understand. Historians still argue whether the use of tartan in the Middle Ages was already formalized or if those associations came later. But one thing's certain, it mattered. And people risked their lives to wear the wrong ones. Or the right ones, at the wrong time. You study the pattern before you slice into it. This particular weave is complex, muted greens, deep blues, a single red thread running every 4th stripe. You count the spacing twice, then a 3rd time. Just in case. The cloak itself is simple enough in form. Semicircular, lined with boiled wool for warmth, weighted at the corners to drape just so. But the trick lies in the fastenings. Instead of permanent stitching, you build a collar with concealed loops, small bond toggles that can be hooked and unhooked in silence. The clasps themselves are tied with wax cord, easily replaceable. You even stitch a fold beneath the shoulder seam where a different tartan panel could be pinned, swapped, if needed. A disguise cloak. Or maybe a declaration that can change depending on who's watching. You pause. Then you add a narrow pocket near the chest. Just enough for a rolled ribbon. Or a message. The client arrives that evening. Hood up, face half hidden beneath the fading light. He inspects the cloak like a hawk circling prey. You don't ask his name. You don't have to. He slips it on, tests the drape, fingers the toggles. Then he pulls from his pouch 2 small cloth strips, one matching the cloak's tartan, and one in a completely different pattern. Blood red and black. Stark. Bold. You say nothing. He nods once. Leaves without a word. You exhale. Later, the tailor pours you a drink. Thin wine, slightly sour. He clinks his mug against yours with a heavy sigh. I made a cloak like that once, he says. Back when the border raids were worse. The man who wore it ended up leading a charge against his own cousin. He needed to pass unnoticed. That tartan made it possible. Or unforgivable. You glance at the scraps still left on the table. The blue. The red. The threads that change lives. You pick one up and run it between your fingers. The thing about tartan is, it hides nothing, but people still don't see it coming. You wonder how many robes, How many cloaks you've made that spoke louder than their wearers ever did? You think of your own robe. Plain. Brown. But the lining now feels like it hums with history. You've learned that tailoring isn't just function or fashion. It's politics. It's identity. It's allegiance stitched in patterns. Tomorrow, you'll go back to patching sleeves and hemming tunics. But tonight? Tonight, you sleep with a scrap of tartan tucked into your pocket. Just in case. The first thing you smell is the river. Not the clean, babbling kind. The other kind, thick with rot, fish bones, and the quiet shame of everything the town doesn't want to deal with. That's how you know you've reached the washerwomen's bend. You're here because your robe, yes, that robe, is starting to develop a personality of its own. It's walked through too many stalls, hugged too many sheep, and been far too intimate with your workshop floor. It needs washing. So naturally, you're terrified. Washing a woolen medieval robe isn't like tossing it in a basin with rose soap and singing ballads. No, this is combat. Water versus weave. Soap versus seams. And somewhere in the middle, you, hoping the whole thing doesn't shrink down to a squirrel-sized tunic. You hand your robe over to Mira, the least grumpy of the washerwomen. She snorts. Another pocket project? She asks, fingering the inside seam like a truffle pig sniffing secrets. You nod. She tuts, then dunks it in a barrel of water that smells like old cabbage and iron nails. It's not actually cabbage, it's urine. Human. Collected and left to ferment. Why? Because in medieval Europe, ammonia-rich urine was used to clean wool. It breaks down oils, strips dirt, and very occasionally, strips dignity. Historians still argue whether all garments were cleaned this way, or whether only working-class folk submitted their precious tunics to the riverside vinegar bath. But the truth is, if you wanted something properly washed, you brought it here, and prayed. You watch as your robe is scrubbed against a flat stone with lye-soaked hands. Mira works with frightening efficiency, her forearms like tree trunks, her mouth muttering curses in 3 dialects. I swear, she grumbles, these hidden seams and lining folds are designed to trap evil. Or at least eel slime. Speaking of which, yes, the river has eels. You spot one slither past a log and pretend it's a floating stick. Mira, unfazed, swats it away with a paddle the size of a small coffin lid. Your robe survives the beating. Mostly. But the pocket, your faithful, discreet companion, needs checking. You inspect it under a patch of sun-dried cloth. The stitches have held. The fabric is stiff but intact. You run your fingers along the seam. Still closed. Still trustworthy. You retie the belt cord and sling it over your shoulder, wet and heavy like a wrung-out dog. And then, because the gods enjoy comedy, it starts to rain. Back at the shop, you hang your robe near the fire and strip down to your linen tunic. The tailor raises an eyebrow. Laundry day? He asks. You nod, dripping. He pours you a mug of cider. It tastes like sour apples and ash. You don't care. You're clean. Ish. As your robe dries, it changes color slightly. From dark brown to near black, then back again as the fire warms it. The wool tightens. The seams pucker. And you begin to think every garment has a lifespan. Washing resets it, or hastens the end. You once heard of a woman who buried her robes in dirt for 3 days to cleanse them spiritually. When she dug them up, they were cleaner, yes, but also missing. Someone had stolen them, apparently impressed by her confidence in dirt. Still, you get it now. Clothes are alive in their own way. They change with you. They wear out when you do. And they hold your scent, your habits, your secrets. Until the river, or the flames, or time itself washes them away. You poke at your robe one last time, testing the pocket again. Still there. Still dry inside. You smile. Because somehow, after ill-infested river water, fermented urine, and medieval laundry theology, it still works. And that's the magic of good tailoring. You're stitching a sleeve onto a traveling merchant's tunic when you hear it, the unmistakable ring of a town crier's bell, followed by a booming voice reading the week's official proclamations. Normally, you wouldn't pay attention. Most of them are about taxes, goat ownership disputes, or how loudly one is allowed to sneeze near clergy. But today, the voice bellows something you do care about. Any citizen wearing garments with excessively wide sleeves, embellished slits, or unauthorized hem lengths shall be fined a half shilling and brought before the guild magistrate. You pause mid-stitch. The tailor drops his shears with a clatter. Again, he mutters. Sumptuary laws. The never-ending sequel. You step outside, apron still on, and join the cluster of townsfolk grumbling at the crier like he's personally measured their sleeves. A few even tug at their cuffs self-consciously. You spot a woman with extra-wide cuffs discreetly tucking them inside her sleeves. A man with a flashy sash suddenly ties it tighter. A teen wearing bright blue, too bright, just bolts down the alley. Smart lad. Historians still argue whether these laws were about controlling luxury or maintaining class distinctions. But standing here now, listening to the list of forbidden sleeve silhouettes, it's obvious, someone in power saw a garment they didn't like and wrote a law about it. You slink back into the workshop, where the tailor is already preparing adjustments. Half the town will arrive in a panic by midday, needing sleeves narrowed, hems shortened, or trims quietly removed before the guild inspectors do their rounds. You get to work on a robe with side slits too suggestive, according to the new edict. You replace them with hidden panels, same slits, just masked. Optical illusions stitched in wool. You begin to notice the pattern. Fashion isn't just a mirror. It's a protest. The people of your town adapt fast. They don't stop wearing forbidden styles, they just learn to hide them better. One man has you line the inside of his cloak with red silk, invisible unless the wind lifts the edge. A seamstress commissions a gown with a double lining, navy over gold, so she can flip it depending on who's watching. You laugh when a shepherd brings in a tunic that accidentally matches the bishop's forbidden pattern. You don't believe him, but you fix it anyway. And then comes the best one. A boy, no older than 12, walks in with a robe stitched entirely from scrap pieces, some plain, some fine, all patchworked into a strange, beautiful chaos. You blink. It's technically within the rules, but it looks like a parade of rebellion. Got in trouble? You ask. He shrugs. My ma said if I'm gonna be fined, might as well make it worth it. You don't even charge him for the adjustment. Later that evening, the tailor hands you a small piece of parchment, a folded note. No name. Just one line written in a tight, careful hand. They fine us for what we wear, but we'll still be seen. You slip the note into your robe's pocket. It's getting full now. A scrap of tartan. A dried lavender sprig. A note from a monk. And now this. You think back to the first pocket you ever stitched, clumsy, crooked, and too shallow to be useful. Now, it's your archive. A hidden history. A rebellion in thread. By the end of the week, the town's fashion has changed again. Sleeves are narrower. Hems cleaner. But the clever bits remain. A discreet button here. A contrast stitch there. A pocket stitched not where it should be, but where it needs to be. The inspector passes through and declares victory. But you know better. Tailors always do. The leaves have started to fall in slow, deliberate spirals outside the shop window. They crunch under passing boots like quiet applause, rustling reminders that the year is folding in on itself. You've been working on the same robe since sunrise, final commission before All Hallows, a long, dark mantle for a traveling widow who insisted it be quiet in movement, but loud in message. You didn't ask what that meant. You just nodded, selected the fabric, and began. Now, with the final seam drawn shut, you sit back and breathe. The tailor pours you each a mug of warm ale spiced with cloves. He raises his to the robe. To the things we wear, he says. You clink mugs. And to the things we hide in them. He laughs, not loud, but deep. You've learned more from seams than most men learn from sermons. You think about that as you sip. It's true. Because you remember every single pocket, every stitched secret. The parchment tucked beneath a monk's sleeve. The tartan folded for rebellion. The codpiece stitched with unspoken pride. The heart pocket near a bride's chest. The hidden hem of a traveling messenger. The lining sewn with lavender. The thread soaked in fear and stitched with defiance. You spent months tailoring the outside of people's lives. But now, as you run your hands over your own robe, the one you've worn, repaired, reshaped, you realize it holds a life of its own. The inside is patched with memories. The pocket carries weight beyond its stitches. And somehow, you've become more than just an apprentice. You're a historian with a needle. Your robe is no longer just wool and lining. It's testimony. The tailor begins to close the shutters for the night. Outside, someone calls out about firewood. A dog barks in response. The world winds down around you. You gather your tools. Wipe your hands. Loop your measuring cord one final time. And as you pull on your robe, now dry, warm, and worn in all the right places, you slide your hand into your pocket. You don't reach for anything. You just feel it. Still there. Still yours. Still unseen by anyone who doesn't know where to look. And that feels like the truest kind of power. The fire dims in the hearth. Its last few flickers cast soft shadows across the walls of the workshop. You sit in stillness, robe wrapped around you like an old friend. The fabric creaks faintly when you shift, molded now to your shape, just another layer of you. Outside, the wind picks up, gentle but insistent, whispering through cracks in the shutters. The world beyond the door fades into hush, footsteps grow rare, voices softer, even the town bell seems to ring more politely. Your body relaxes, your breath slower. You run your thumb along the edge of your pocket one more time. It's not about what's inside it anymore. It's about what it means. A quiet rebellion. A subtle comfort. A stitched reminder that you had a part in shaping something, enduring. You think of the tailor, his quiet wisdom, his relentless hands, his faith in thread. You think of the robes that passed through your hands, each carrying more than its weight. You think of the you who first walked through the workshop door, unsure of every stitch. Not anymore. Now you sleep knowing that in a world bound by rules, robes, and rituals, you found space between the seams. You made room for stories. For secrets. For you. So close your eyes now. Let the wool around your shoulders anchor you. Let the whisper of linen guide your breath. You are safe. You are unseen. And you are exactly where you belong. Sweet dreams.